Hello and welcome to Spacewalk's Money Talks, where we talk about space exploration, business, technology, policy, and history. I'm Chris Alvarez, and thank you for listening. I'm speaking with David J. Eicher, co-author of Cosmic Clouds 3D, published by MIT Press, June 2020. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure.
So first, so you've been involved with space studies for a while. Tell me how you got into studying and writing on this particular subject.
Well, it's a long story, but I'll compress it. I grew up the son of an organic chemist at Miami University in Ohio, and so I grew up around a chem lab. And, you never want to do exactly what your dad did, but I was very interested in the sciences, and I was sort of on a path, I thought, maybe to becoming an applied scientist with a physician, medicine surgeon maybe. And then I made the mistake of going to a star party in this little college town one night and saw Saturn in a small telescope and was immediately electrified that you could just go out and see this stuff in your yard. And so I was just turned on incredibly. It led to founding a little publication about observing the sky, and that led me to Astronomy magazine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell me about the focus of this book and also Brian May's part in it, because he's the other co-author, guitarist of Queen, the whole celebrity status there. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, Brian is an astrophysicist. He was on the cusp of completing his PhD in 1970 in Tenerife, and when he things really sort of started rolling with this band, Queen, Mm-hmm. And so to his family's horror, at first, he stopped his PhD work and went off and played rock and roll. It worked out okay for him, yeah. But he went back actually and completed his PhD 30-some years later, mm-hmm. Under the guise of a professor called Garrick Israelian. And they had the idea about a decade ago to start a science festival that would publicize and celebrate both science, astronomy, and other sciences, and music. And they called it Starmus, the Starmus Festival. And that's where I fell in and got to know them about a decade ago. And they invited me to become part of the board there of the Starmus Festival. And we've been pals ever since. And so this is actually the second book that Brian and I have worked on together.
Okay. Can you spell Starmus for anyone who wants to?
Starmus, for stars and music.
Oh, okay. All right. So this book is focused on astronomy book on nebula or nebulae. Well, you can correct me.
Nebulae, in fact, indeed, the cosmic clouds that are scattered all through the sky. Mm-hmm. And we did our first book on. It struck us that we ought to do a 50th anniversary book of stereo views of the Apollo landings. Mm-hmm. Brian, since he was a kid, has been fascinated with stereoscopy and 3D views of reality, of all sorts of things. And he's a master at it and a collector of stereo cards and viewing the world in 3 dimensions. Mm-hmm. So we did that Apollo book, and we were able to sort through the huge archive of Apollo astronaut images to match up views that would make 3-dimensional views when viewed side by side. Mm-hmm. Don't have that luxury here, taking it out into the universe, because we don't have the objects obviously are so distant that you can't get a parallax difference in shooting views mm-hmm. to make a 3D view of them. But we knew of this incredible Finnish astrophotographer whose name is J.P. Metsävainio, and he has simulated in a very sophisticated way these 3-dimensional views of nebulae. So these are the star clouds in which stars are born. They're sort of on the endpoints of the lives of stars. They're the clouds of gas and dust where stars are born, and also the clouds of gas and residue that result from stars dying as well. So it shows us the whole life cycle of stars in this present book.
Now, are these clouds found in, can you identify certain areas of the galaxy or the universe where they're found? Are they concentrated somewhere, or is it sort of random? more or less.
Indeed, they're concentrated in our sky along the plane of the Milky Way. You know, the milky glowing light you can see if you get away from cities as a band of light through the sky at various times is our galaxy that we're a part of, seen from within. Mm-hmm. And all of these clouds that we're looking at are inside our Milky Way, and so they more or less lie along that band of light that we call the Milky Way in the sky. Mm-hmm. Although, of course, there are many billions of other galaxies in the universe that also have these clouds, but they're very, very far away, of course.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about the telescopes that are used to capture the image or the data of these clouds?
Yeah, now we included images from other astrophotographers and some professional observatory, a few images as well in 3D to show those in simulation. Mm-hmm. But mostly they're captured with telescopes anywhere from about 8 inches in diameter, that's the diameter of the mirror, mm-hmm. up to about 20 inches or so. So these are medium to large amateur telescopes. Most of these photos were made with that you can buy and actually use as an amateur astrophotographer and capture these pictures. Mm-hmm. Astronomy is almost a unique science in that we have the same laboratory as amateurs, as lovers of the sky, as the professionals do.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'm not sure, and this might be outside the scope of the book, but perhaps you have an answer. So you do have amateurs doing this with their own equipment, but how about telescope for the big observatories? Do they get a lot of time to photograph or image or collect data on these clouds? You know, because I know space science, there are a lot of conflicting requirements and demands.
There are indeed, and there's more going on in terms of astronomical research now than ever before. So it's really a fire hose of people doing research projects now and in all sorts of different directions. So these clouds have been studied well by professional astronomers with telescopes that are on the ground and to some degree orbiting telescopes like Hubble as well. But they're one of many, many categories of things that get studied. So they are competing for time, although understanding the life cycles of stars and how stars are born and evolve over time, which changes a lot depending on the mass of the star. It's very different for lightweight stars compared to heavy stars, is really important to understand how the universe works. So they've gotten a lot of time and attention in the past.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when I interview people, I also focus on space commercialization, you know, everyone trying to make money off space. Does the study of these, you know, this kind of study, is it right now just for pure science and understanding, or does it have any business applications at all, any of the information gathered?
It is really for pure research and pure understanding of how stars and the galaxy work. It really doesn't have that sort of commercial or space exploration angle to it, mm-hmm. like some things like, you know, mining asteroids and things like that in the solar system eventually will probably. Mm-hmm. So it's really kind of purely an understanding how things work. But that's important because it tells us about the sun, and we know what the future of the sun is going to be because of this, and how our sun formed and what will happen to our solar system and how long life will go on Earth before it's untenable, and all sorts of related questions come out of this study, but it's not really a commercial study.
Mm-hmm. So how do you choose, how many different images could you have included, and how many did you include, and how did you choose that?
Yeah, that was really hard because there are so many. You know, this is in astronomy with images and with research and so on. We have an embarrassment of riches going on these days. So we started with 200 or 300 images and included as many as we could. I think there are a couple of hundred images in the book. a lot of them that JP shot as stereo pairs were important to go in because he put a lot of time in figuring out, say, what was in front of the center of this object and what was behind it and all this kind of stuff. So we ended up with a couple of hundred pictures, but we started with about 400 we were looking at to consider altogether. And there are many, many thousands. The archives at Astronomy magazine have about 35,000 such images of really nice nebulae. Now, pictures of these kinds of astronomical objects do get better over time. Mm-hmm. So generally, the more recent ones are the ones that look coolest and are the best.
I'm speaking with David J. Eicher, co-author of Cosmic Clouds 3D. You can find more information on Twitter at @DEicherStar and on Facebook at David John Eicher, or on the Astronomy magazine website. If you like this podcast so far, please subscribe to it and rate it and review it if you can. Please go to my website, spacewalksmoneytalks.com, for links to news, videos, new books, and my social media links. You can find the links to my other podcasts and associated book lists at historyrabbithole.com. That's rabbit as in the animal. historyrabbithole.com. Thank you for your support. And now back to the podcast. Who made the choice on what to include and what factors went into those choices?
And that was really a group effort. JP, who shot a lot of these stereos, chose and sent us a lot of the ones that he liked best of his. And there were others that I chose a lot of, and there are others. Brian served as the creative director on this book, if you will. So lots of things made the rounds, and a whole team of people. Brian's publishing company that co-publishes the book actually with MIT is called the London Stereoscopic Company. Okay. And Reese, Brian's publisher, and others were in on looking at all this and helping to shape it all into a book as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as I know, that when these telescopes take pictures, they're not actually taking pictures of the colors that are seen. It's not optical. It's sort of where your systems create the colors based on sort of parameters you enter as you collect the data. Is that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there are a couple of things going on there that make them look much better and different than what we can see, say, in real time in a telescope. Mm-hmm. Human eyes, first of all, collect light for about 1/30th of a second, and then they dump it to the brain and they collect light again. So we don't collect and build up light very long with our eyes. So we can't see color in really faint stuff is one limitation that we have. Mm-hmm. Also, you're right that recording these pixels now with digital, nowadays everything is recorded with CCD chips in cameras. Mm-hmm. And they're recorded digitally on pixels. And you can really adjust the colors and the saturation to make things look really zingy or to make them look pretty much as the human eye would see them. Mm-hmm. So everyone really kind of leans on the saturation button, if you will, now. Mm. But you can with these pictures, and many of these nebulae, for example, are strongly red because of the light that they put out. We don't see them as red in the telescope because our eyes aren't sensitive enough to the faint light. But if you could see that sensitive faint light, they are actually red. So even though they look different in the pictures than we see them, many of them are portrayed accurately. It's a limitation of our eyes as much as calibrating the camera. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Since you mentioned digital, if anyone were to put analog, put film on a satellite and get it out there to take pictures, with current technology, is there any benefit to film still over digital in any way?
There really isn't anymore. Now, for a while, digital chips when they were new and everyone wanted one, wasn't really kind of as great as film because the resolution wasn't so wonderful. But the really big chips now that even you can get in a sort of a middle to upper end Canon DSLR has a full frame chip in it now. And that has so many pixels in it that it's really as good as film, and the digital aspect of it makes it more efficient and much better, so that you can capture faint stuff in much shorter times now. Because remember, when you take a picture of something in the sky, Earth is rotating, so you need to track on the stars in the opposite direction that that Earth is moving in order to have sharp stars. So it's really tricky. And so shorter exposures with the digital stuff makes that a lot easier than it used to be. Now, film shots are beautiful still, and especially wide field Milky Way shots shot on film and stuff. But they're really, not many people are really doing that at all for the last 20 years or so.
Mm-hmm. So in the book, it's not just the photographs or the pictures. There's also text involved. What do you include? What do you write about these pictures?
A lot, and that was my primary job, was writing the text with this book. And it starts off talking about how something that Carl Sagan used to say, we're really made of this star stuff that goes into making stars. The atoms in our body, of which there are many billions in our human bodies, were either made, some of them, the lightest ones, at the very start of the universe, what was called Big Bang nucleosynthesis. But most of them, the so-called heavier than hydrogen or helium atoms, were made in exploding stars, that literally the atoms that are in our bodies. So by looking at the process of stars being born and going through their evolution and dying, we're seeing literally where we came from as well, from an atomic standpoint, the elements that make up our bodies. So we look at that, and we look then at the Milky Way and what's in our Milky Way galaxy and throughout it, what is called the interstellar medium. That's the stuff between the stars, this gas and dust that gets compressed. And really what we're in the galaxy, what galaxies do, is a gigantic recycling program. So gravity compresses gas down to make new stars, and old stars explode and send gas and dust out. And so this process goes on over the span of millions or hundreds of millions of years, over and over and over, with generations of stars. And we're part of that. So we look at the life cycles of stars, and then we take a detailed look at the different kinds of these clouds, these nebulae. Some of them are stellar birthplaces, as I mentioned, where this gas is coming together and being pulled together by gravity, and it makes a cluster of new stars. And we can see some of these star clusters with gas around them in our telescopes. Others, as I mentioned, are the endpoints of stars. And stars like our sun will end up, when it can't burn its hydrogen and slightly heavier elements anymore. Stars are nuclear fusion reactors. That's what they do. That's what's putting out the energy that gives us life on Earth, is our sun's nuclear reactions. When they run out of stuff to burn, if you will, then a star like the sun belches off its outer layers and becomes a cocoon and a little remnant inside, and forms what's called a planetary nebula, because it looks like a planet in a telescope. That's what we will end up as. But massive stars that are really massive can explode like a bomb, and they're called supernovae. They create these supernova remnants that are big clouds of gas. And then we can look, at the future of the sun and us, and the fact that, we're about halfway through the sun's life. Our solar system is 4.6 billion years old. In about 5 billion years or so, our sun will run out of fuel, and it will slough off its outer layers and will become one of these planetary nebulae that you can see across the galaxy for a few tens of thousands of years.
It's interesting the way you describe the process. I can think either it's with the growth and then the explosions, it's either a machine or it's actually the universe, or the galaxy at least, is a living thing, because it does include life within the machine of processes that are going on.
It certainly has produced living things on Earth, this one planet. Now, just to speculate for a second, the visible universe that we can see, we know there are about 100 billion galaxies. The Milky Way galaxy is just one of them, the galaxy that we're in, about 2/3 of the way out from the center of our galaxy. We know that altogether there are about 10,000 billion stars in the universe, in the visible universe, which may not be the whole universe. And yet we know and we also know through spectroscopy, through looking at the spectra of objects, very distant objects even, that chemistry works the same way all over the universe. And we know that there are sophisticated organic compounds and molecules in the solar system, in comets and in asteroids, things like amino acids that are the building blocks of proteins and so on. So the stuff of life is out there, yet we know of only one planet where life exists, of course, so far, right here. So how many other planets could there be out of 10,000 billion star systems? That's out for resolution still. Astronomers won't run out of any work to do for a while yet.
Well, didn't Harvard just say that there are 37 or 36 communicating out there?
Well, that was an estimate, yeah, and you could go from anywhere that there's some astronomers even who think that life is a one-time occurrence. That seems to be awfully bold, because we come from a heritage of hundreds and several thousands of years of thinking that we're the most important place in the center of everything. That turns out not exactly to be true in the universe. And we know that chemistry is universal everywhere. So it would be astonishing, given the numbers, if there weren't life spread generously throughout the galaxy and the universe. However, the distances are so large that you probably wouldn't have them physically coming to places, landing in Central Park and having lunch with the aliens.
Yeah. Well, I guess some scientists, though, they demand they must see the data for themselves. They don't go on they resist unless
Oh, absolutely. Well, science is definitely about the data and about repeatability and about experimentation, observation, empiricism. We have no evidence of life anywhere else as yet. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. In a sense, it's faith, that there is.
Yeah. Well, and maybe probabilities for some at the moment here.
Yeah, I'm just cracking jokes here.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you see any, so as far as this study of this, do you see what in science, are there any advances that are needed? Well, obviously there's a lot that are needed, but do you see any in the close horizon that will happen to help us understand all of this better?
Oh boy, I do. And I think the thing that will help us understand how the universe works better, because there is big spacecraft exploration, can we all get together and put all the resources together and go to Mars and all sorts of things like that. Those could be done, but in a pure scientific way of understanding the universe, what's happening now, what's just starting to happen now, is that there are these enormous surveys that are starting to take place that will look at huge numbers of stars and of galaxies and of planetary systems outside our solar system, of which we know of several thousand planets around other stars now. And these surveys are really starting to take off, and that'll give us a more quantitative look with these survey projects at what the galaxy is all about, and may lead to things like how many planets are in the habitable zones of other stars, and where did the sister stars that our sun was born with go as we orbited the galaxy, and all sorts of questions like the fate of the universe, what will happen eventually to the whole universe at large. There are a lot of big questions that are on the cusp of being answered now. And the fact that we can do surveys with big telescopes and produce a lot more data more quickly than you could 10 or 20 years ago will start to answer a lot of those questions. But always the most exciting stuff tends to be the things that you can't predict. The surprises.
Yeah, the eureka moments.
Right.
So, and I know this is beyond the scope of this book, but I'd like to ask about science education. What do you think about the enthusiasm for these subjects and the funding and support for science and STEM, STEM and STEAM?
Yeah, well, we have, it's better than it ever has been before. And there's a lot going on. There's enormous enthusiasm for the students who are interested in science and involved with STEM and with STEAM. And yet we have probably more of a dichotomy in the last a couple of decades here of a lot of people who rely on science, but they fundamentally don't believe it, or they're suspicious of it as well. So I think the students are very much on board and are very enthralled by it and understand the reasoning of science as a way to comprehend what the truth is, what's really happening in the universe. If that's important to you and you understand at all what science is and how it works, then science becomes important. But there tend to be a huge number of people in this world, as much as, as large a percentage maybe as there was 500 years ago, it would seem, of people who think that, science is just another method and it's no better than hearing the opinion from your friend or another authority figure, So we seem to, in society at large, have a long way to go, because we're, in a lot of people's minds, science hasn't made a lot more progress than, the year 1500 on the streets of Florence. When, we're waiting for Galileo to come along.
And maybe I'm answering my own question here, but do you see do people become more positive towards science once if they're brought to telescopes, if they're allowed to look through the telescopes or get their hands on scientific tools and that sort of thing?
I think they do. I think, and I don't want to be sarcastic or mean about this, but, everyone seems to be a believer in science when they're lying in a hospital bed. But do they believe it or think about the most logical reasoning and the realities of things all the time? Most people don't. But I don't know. I don't think I answered you. Maybe you could restate your question. I think I sidestepped it there. I didn't mean to.
Oh, no. I'm thinking about efforts to, like NASA outreach or other outreach programs. Is it, when you reach out to kids, is it basically preaching to the choir? Or do you think, how do you reach into, into minds that are resistant?
Sure. Well, that's a really good question. And we try to do everything we can, with the book projects that we're doing, and with Astronomy Magazine, which has the largest audience of astronomy enthusiasts, and with other sciences, with the Starmus Festival, and publicize what's going on there. We've had many astronauts and many Nobel Prize winners there, laureates as well, giving talks there. And you mentioned, when someone gets their own look through a telescope and they see the moon live and the actual photons hitting their eyes and so on, I think they do become, a little bit attuned to it and alive from it there. It's hard because, most people have such busy days now, and just doing what they need to do in their lives is such a struggle. Most people never get to see the sky in terms of astronomy. That is a dark sky. Light pollution is getting worse and worse and worse all the time. A couple of 100 years ago, essentially everyone had a dark sky. Now, most of the people, for example, in the United States, east of the Mississippi, don't have a truly dark sky. So it's a challenge, but we keep fighting the fight, and we hope that over time things are getting better, and certainly more people than, I was a little bit jokey there. More people believe in science than did 500 years ago, but it's a slow process, and you would hope that people would realize it's in their best interest to understand the way things really are closer to the leading edge of what we know now, because that's what education and progress are all about, finding out how to manage the world in the best way that we can. So, it's all there if people are interested enough. They can certainly be as aware as anyone else.
Yeah. I'm speaking with David J. Eicher, co-author of Cosmic Clouds 3D. You can find more information on Twitter at @DEicherStar and on Facebook at David John Eicher, or on the Astronomy magazine website. If you like this podcast so far, please subscribe to it and rate it and review it if you can. Please go to my website, spacewalksmoneytalks.com, for links to news, videos, new books, and my social media links. You can find the links to my other podcasts and associated book lists at historyrabbithole.com. That's rabbit as in the animal, historyrabbithole.com. And now back to the podcast. And again, a question beyond the scope of the book, but just tapping your knowledge and experience. Do you see any challenges in space education or space research that could easily be overcome with just a few changes in policy or law or funding or anything like that?
I do. And, in general, and not just the present administration, in general, in recent times, since the shuttle program, the United States Congress has not been fantastically excited about funding science. And the problem is that the forward, look at what's important tends to be about a week, for politicians rather than a longer period of time. So there are certainly big challenges. I think it's inevitable that a big mission lies in the future, and the things that SpaceX and other private companies are doing are critical leading up to either getting back to the moon or going to Mars or doing more space research about things that could help ordinary lives on Earth as well, because a lot of such things came out of Apollo, for example. But those kinds of things are going to really take multiple governments and private and government organizations working together, because there's such huge undertakings, especially going to Mars, taking people to Mars is going to be so expensive and so complicated that's a little ways off. It seems to always be we're close to that and then not really for a long time now. But the thing that's better to see, I think, in terms of space exploration is the enthusiasm, the excitement of so many young people are really excited and interested about space again, almost kind of like the Apollo era when I was young and growing up. And SpaceX, its other things, there are a lot of young people who are really juiced up about exploring space, and I think they're going to do exciting things.
The James Webb, when is that?
No, that's been delayed more than twice now, and John Mather is a friend who's the project scientist, and it's slated to be launched next year. Now, whether that actually happens or not, we don't know yet. There have been a couple of false starts already. It's an extremely complicated thing to get going, and it's a very expensive project, of course, but that'll in essence be the replacement for the Hubble Space Telescope that will be, eventually its orbit will be decaying Hubble. And among many, many other things, Webb should tell us about how the first stars and galaxies formed in the universe, which we don't know. And it should survey in a much, much better way the nearby worlds and be able to find maybe true Earth-like worlds that are around us in the galaxy. So there are exciting things happening that will happen to come, but I think it's going to be at least another year before that gets going. It's such a complicated project.
Is that the biggest or only recent astronomy-related project being developed or finished, or are there others?
There are others that have been planetary missions for the most part, and some other smaller telescope projects as well. Mm-hmm. But this is the big one. This is the expensive one that will benefit all areas of astronomy and that will be the workhorse for a generation to come, like Hubble was.
Mm-hmm. So to turn back to the book,
yes.
What part of it, and obviously you've been involved in this for a while, but for this book, what part of it was most enjoyable? What do you discover?
Well, I think writing about the galaxy and the interstellar medium, the stuff in the galaxy that's floating around, and how stars form. Because when I was a teenager, just getting involved with this stuff, I had a pair of binoculars, and I went out in a farm field, and we had a reasonably dark sky. I grew up in southern Ohio. And near right out in back of my neighborhood, a suburb, it was a pretty good sky. And just sort of going around the sky with 7x50 binoculars, you can see some of these things. And so just stumbling on them and finding them and understanding what they were. I didn't know what anything was at first, of course. Finding out what they were, and that these were the places where new stars are being born, just like our sun was. And understanding that they orbit around the center of the galaxy and their stars are dispersed and scattered, and this is how stars live, if you will, kind of analogously to people. They have lifetimes too, and so I think writing about the formation of stars was among the most fun.
Was growing up in Ohio as a big flight history state formative for your interests?
Oh, yes, indeed. And I grew up in Oxford. And first of all, I can say that my father, John Eicher, he lived to be 95. We lost him in 2016. But he grew up on Ruskin Road in Dayton, Ohio. And he was 2 doors down. The Eicher house, that was in 1929, they built a house. He grew up in the 30s, mostly there. So that was 2 doors down from a woman who was named Ivanette Wright Miller, the niece of the Wright brothers. Yeah. Of course, Wilbur was long gone at that point in time, but every once in a while, Orville would drive his big black touring car with acetylene torches up and park it, and my father would talk to him. And so, we think of the origin of space flight being incredibly far back in time. That's just one generation back to the origin of flight, of powered flight, in Dayton. So, Wright-Patterson in Dayton and all the connections there at Miami in Ohio. There's a big heritage of the Wright brothers, of course, there.
Yeah. Did you discover anything surprising for this particular book? Did you come across something that surprised you?
Well, to be honest, I knew most of this stuff already. And I've written, I've had a 37-year career at Astronomy magazine after doing my own amateur teenage writing and so on. So I really knew all this. It's fun to get up to the latest moment with each of these kinds of questions and the research and summarize it all. But I've been kind of playing in this playground for a long time now and paying attention to it. So I didn't really learn a lot with this book. I did learn some things with the Apollo book because I'm more of a deep sky observer, galaxy science research kind of guy than I was an Apollo guy. So that was a little more revealing to me.
Okay. Were there any images that you wanted to include but couldn't because of some technical limitation or something about it that limited its usefulness for being included in the book? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I honestly don't think there really were. Now, most of the images are these 3D images, and there are some other images in the book as well. So I would say, maybe the 3D images were sort of chosen in part by what JP decided to shoot as simulated 3D objects. But he covered the big, exciting ones pretty exhaustively. So I don't think there really was an image that we really longed to have that we didn't have.
What would you say are your 3 favorite images in the book? And I hate to put you on the spot, choose the best, but which ones do you personally like the most?
No problem. I would have to say the best nebula that we have in the northern sky is the Orion Nebula. And you can actually see it in a dark sky, reasonably dark sky, with the naked eye alone. Mm-hmm. It's in what's called the sword of Orion below Orion's belt, those 3 bright stars in Orion. Mm-hmm. And there's a fuzzy star you can see just with your naked eye in the sword, and that's the Orion Nebula. It's the biggest star-forming region that's in the northern sky. Now, the Carina Nebula is another great, unbelievably huge, bright star-forming region. Problem is, for many of us, that's in the southern hemisphere sky, so you need to get down to the southern hemisphere to see it. And then another favorite is the Lagoon Nebula that's in the summer sky. The Orion Nebula is in the wintertime sky. The Lagoon Nebula in Sagittarius is in the summer sky, and that's a beautiful object as well, with a bright star cluster and all sorts of gas and dust. And you can go out and in a pretty good sky, even really binoculars or a really small scope, and see these things for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Would you be willing to speak for Brian May? Do you know if he had any particular favorites in the collection?
Oh, boy, I'd hate to say that for Brian. And Brian's a little bit out of touch. He's been through a very rough time with his health recently here. Yeah. So, okay. But he's doing okay. But he's after a couple of big years of touring with Queen, he's had a sort of a rough year this year, aside over and beyond the normal COVID craziness that all of us have had to deal with. So I really would hate to speak for Brian. He's talked about a lot of objects, but I wouldn't want to say exactly what his favorite is.
Okay, I understand. And hopefully he gets better.
Yeah, I think he's on the mend now. Okay. Yep.
Good. So obviously there are going to be a lot of enthusiasts for the book, but what about the reader who takes a look and says, oh, these are pretty cool pictures, and then they close it? What would you like them to, take a moment and take from what they're seeing?
Well, and there are going to be a lot of people like that who never take the effort to go out and to see this stuff in a sky, away from a city and all like this. And they are beautiful pictures, so they do show you a picture book quality of the universe. But I guess the incredible diversity of stuff and the size of our galaxy, if we this is maybe a little bit difficult with an audio interview, but if we imagine the distance between sun and Earth as 1 centimeter, that's 1 astronomical unit. That's 1 centimeter is the Earth to the sun distance, say. Mm-hmm. The edge of our solar system on that scale is 10 football fields off to the side. Yeah. And that is just 1/4 of a light year. Okay?
Yeah.
And the disk of our galaxy, just the disk part, the bright part of just our galaxy alone, is 100,000 light years across. So not only is there great diversity of all these kinds of stars and nebulae and forming in groups and exploding and dying all over that have all these different amazing colorful looks, but they're spread out over this almost incomprehensibly large scale that it's almost impossible for us to imagine. And that's just 1 galaxy out of 100 billion that we know exists. So I suppose the incredible beauty and diversity of the universe and the unbelievable magnitude of how large the universe is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we need to find the wormholes.
Yeah, right.
Oh, boy. Yeah, that's a pretty daunting task. But then again, I guess the oceans looked daunting for early explorers when they were...
That's true, indeed. Yeah.
Oh, boy. So it sounds like putting together the book and finishing it was pretty smooth, but were there any difficulties in getting it finished or published?
Not really. I mean, I think the difficulty always is that, it's not a difficulty, but it's a little bit of a complication, is that, when you're working with a guy who's one of the most famous rock musicians in the world. Mm-hmm. He's got about 50 things going on simultaneously. So the fact that Brian can squeeze something like this in and pay attention to it and go back and forth on things and work on it is pretty incredible. I mean, when Queen was touring, he was looking, after shows late at night at proofs and so on. The guy is superhuman with his energy and with his ability and interest to get involved in many, many things, because he's involved in animal welfare. He's heavily involved in music, of course, in astronomy and stereoscopy and other stereo activities and publishing. He has many, many interests, and he's constantly involved in all of them. So it's an amazing thing that we can get these projects done because he's one busy guy.
That's what I would call a Renaissance man.
He is indeed, and he's an incredibly, very knowledgeable. I think it's apparent to everyone. I mean, he's very well known. His interviews are well known. He's a doctorate, PhD in astrophysics. He's a very brilliant guy, but also a very down to earth, very warm, soft spoken guy, and that's quite a combination.
Mm-hmm. So, what's your next writing project?
Well, that's a good question. I have a couple of things that are kind of just starting now. I also have a book on galaxies that was just published last month by Random House that was a long project, too. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of taking a breath after having two books come out nearly simultaneously. Mm-hmm. But I have a couple of ideas that I'm just getting traction on going at the moment here. One of them is looking sort of about combining science and American history. I've done some writing on American history as well, and there's a big sort of heritage of science and of Newtonian physics and so on among the early founders of the United States, too, that hasn't been written about much. So maybe I'll get involved in that.
Okay. Where can people find you on the web? Web page or social media?
They can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, David Eicher, Eicher, and they can find Astronomy Magazine in all those places. They can find me on astronomy.com, our website, and here, there, and everywhere else. Okay.
So tell me, what excites you at this moment in time? What excites you about space?
It's a tremendous moment because I mentioned it a little bit earlier. We've come after having these big questions forever, as long as people looked up and wondered what the twinkling points were. We've had the resolution to some of these big questions come upon us just in this generation now, after hundreds, thousands of years or longer. What will happen ultimately to the universe? How did the Big Bang origin of the universe happen? What will happen to life on Earth? Not to ruin the surprise, but we have only about 1 billion years on Earth left maximum. How did the moon form? What happened to Mars, which used to be a wet planet and now is a dry planet? How did Venus turn itself inside out? What's the nature of Pluto? How many stars are around us in the Milky Way with planetary systems? All these big things that really were speculations, we're finding out the answers to now in this generation. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be involved in astronomy. And it's just an overload of research and of images going on now. So it's a good problem to have. Too much cool stuff to think about.
Yeah, it is good. So that's all the questions I have. Do you have any final thoughts or words?
I think you've covered things extremely well, and I thank you again for having me. And Cosmic Clouds 3D and also my Galaxies book are both out there now, and I will get busy on the next round.
Don't feel the pressure. It's okay. It's okay. Take your breath. All right. Well, thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, Spacewalks Money Talks, please subscribe to it and rate it and review it if possible. I have many other options as well to get great space information. You can find links to interesting space videos on my Facebook page, Spacewalks Money Talks. You can find links to interesting space news articles and academic information on my Twitter page, SpacewalksMT. You can find photos on my Instagram page, Spacewalks Money Talks. You can find my videos on my YouTube page, Spacewalks Money Talks. You can also sign up for my newsletter at spacewalksmoneytalks.com. In the newsletter, I post additional video and news links as well as regular updates on new space science, business, and history books being published. Thank you for listening.